G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the pub test, and in this one, we are continuing the Jack the Ripper suspect series. But this, at the end, you'll have to hang around because it does tie a little bit back in to the Mary Kelly crime scene. So hang around to see that connection. But who was Nikolay Vasiliev? And how does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, let's put it to the pub test. Now, I'm not 100% sure how you would pronounce this last name, and also it's of note that there are different spellings of this last name that are out there as well. But I'm going to call him Nikolay, or the Russin Ripper as he became known. And yes, in November of 1888, not long after the Mary Kelly crime, this bloke, Nikolay, hit the papers not just in England, but around the world. Many people saying this was the Russin Ripper who's come over to London and done these crimes. And it became so well known in such a short space of time that some books were even written about the Ripper, and this Nikolay, the Russin Ripper, was included. And in some of them, they really pointed out that he would be the number one suspect. Well, said this bloke was born in Kherson province in Russia. Now, before you slam the comments and say, Owen, that is actually part of Ukraine. And yes, that is true. So today we'd call him Ukrainian, but at the time, this part of the world was under Russian control, and therefore he was known as the Russin Ripper. And I think if you're from Ukraine, you probably don't want to have him be known as the Ukrainian Ripper. But just for the sake of a historical fact of when he was known in that time bubble, we'll keep referring to him as Russian. They said he was rather religious. He got a good education, but his personal religious beliefs were quite strong, and he was part of what was known as the Skopsti. Again, I don't know the pronunciation properly, but in England it was known as the Shawn. And what it was, you could be male or female and join this particular religious group, but you just sort of had to remove various parts of your body that would maybe no longer make you male nor female. Now, before you have that mental image of him going to chop a few things off himself, he may not have necessarily have done that, because it wasn't a requirement to have that done to be part of this religious group. But it was the notion of being able to control or rise above those base urges that men and women have. And before you died at any time, you could get the necessary business done so that you could enter paradise. Now that's, as I understand, what this group believed. And it did have quite some influence and lots of members. Interestingly, it was Joseph Stalin that basically quashed this quite some time later and got rid of this religious group altogether. Whether it still operates, I really don't know. But they were receiving persecution in Russia as well, and so Nikolay, he takes off to France. So he turns up in 1872 in Paris. And apparently he's got some people vouching for him, so he finds a place to stay. But because of these religious beliefs, he goes out trying to spread the good word amongst the people out there. And particularly, he goes to the ladies on the street, trying to maybe save them, we would say. He doesn't receive the best of responses, and so this kind message of one of, there's probably a better life out there for you, turned into one of a little bit more of a judgment message, and he was getting a bit abusive, so it's said, towards some of these women. So then it's surprising what happened next. He meets one of these women, Madeline, and he takes a bit more of a shining to her and basically says to her, look, I could save you from this life on the street. So he sets her up in a lodging place. he finds her a job supposedly at a lace factory. And then he starts forming a relationship with this woman from the street. And that's why I suggest that perhaps he hadn't gone through with that entire operation to join the Sean. But you can decide for that yourself later. But you see, the strange as of all things happened is that Madeline took off. She just disappeared. Now, we may ask why. Why would she just take off if he's treating her well, found her lodgings, got her a decent job? Well, it actually reminds me of a joke I heard once. How many psychologists does it take to change a light globe? 1. But the light globe has got to want to change. Now, I pause so that you could have a little chuckle to yourself there. But the thing is, maybe this woman didn't want to change. Maybe she felt like her life was better rather than working the 9 to 5 in a lace factory. Who knows? But she's taken off, but he is not happy. And it is a point that you can't force people into doing anything that they really don't want to do, or at least you shouldn't. But he goes out to find her, to bring her back and help her get her life back on track. Well, actually, no. He finds her after 2 months and he stabs her. And then he goes on what can only be described as a bit of a spree over the next 2 weeks. And 7 or 8 other women who work on the streets he is also taken out in Paris. And this is in 1872. But he attacks a woman and she screams and he gets caught. Now they take him to court. Now I find it rather surprising that when at court he's given 16 years in a mental asylum. Obviously his defense lawyers did quite the good job in convincing whoever was on the jury or the judge that, look, all this bloke needs is a bit of help despite the atrocities that he's committed. Now the varying reports of where he served that 16 years is either in France, most likely Paris I believe, or he was actually sent back to Russia. The important thing is though, when he gets out after 16 years, that is in 1888, so in January, he's released. And he says, you know what? I might go try my luck in London. So then he's gone to London in 1888. Hence why, after the Mary Kelly crime, and they've put no doubt not just the 5 that we accept today, but all the other crimes during that year, all together, well, it really points strongly at this bloke. Yet there's just one important detail about Nikolay Vasiliev that I may have left out at the start. Is that there's actually no record that he existed. There's no record of that family in that Kherson province, in the Russian area, or Ukraine for that matter, if we want to call it that. There's no reports of all these women being killed in Paris in 1872. There's no records of this bloke in any asylum in Russia or in France, and there's definitely no reports of him actually arriving in London in 1888. And yet, not long after the Mary Kelly crime, he is worldwide news, reported in many, many papers, and written about in books as one of the prime suspects. How? Because they had his family history. They had where he got educated, where he travelled around in the world. All this information surely could have been checked, but nobody apparently did do a fact check on this story. Now, it is interesting fact-checking. We had a tragic event in Australia not long ago where a nutter went around in a shopping centre and did kill quite a few women. More than Jack the Ripper did in his time, just in that one afternoon at a big shopping centre. And he did get dealt with on the scene Won't talk about that in this particular video, but it was an absolute tragedy and shocked Australia. It probably made news around the world as well. But what was really disturbing about this, other than those crimes, which were absolutely horrendous, one news outlet ran the story of who the perpetrator was, and they got that information off a social media post that went viral. But that social media post was actually slandering somebody because they were not the perpetrator. But they ran this bloke's name and image on the news as the lowlife bludger who committed that crime. Because no one did a fact check. Now, that got corrected very quickly by all the other news agencies because they're like, yeah, we're going to make that mob look rather stupid right now. But this didn't happen with Nikolay. There were no corrections. There was no one back in the day that said, well, this was a made-up story. He didn't exist. We're really sorry for casting dispersions on that family name. So how could that happen? Well, if you've been following this channel for a while, you would no doubt know what I think of the Jack the Ripper saga and the role that the media played in it. And if you haven't seen it, go check out Jack the Ripper, the true story, with the question marks, because this is the pub test. You can let me know what you think of it. But yes, we know the media inserted many stories in the papers, exaggerated some things to sell some copies. But you wouldn't think they could uniformly get away with it, because if one person put out an article and someone else definitely knew it was false, they would run that counter story, because that would also sell papers and make the other people that they're competing against look bad. So what it draws my mind to the fact that perhaps a high-level member of the police was feeding this story to the press. And if you haven't seen the last video on Mary Kelly and the Irish Brotherhood, I encourage you to go back and watch it. But that would fit that very well, because now the police are pointing to a foreigner, to someone with mental health issues. In fact, they just got out of an asylum. Now again, their motive for doing so may not be so sinister other than taking the heat out of this situation, which it did. So despite Mary Kelly's crime being the most graphic, the worst, very quickly after that inquest and during this little burst in the media about certain people who could have perpetrated the crime, well, the reporting fell off a cliff. And so did the general interest of the public. Because now it's like, well, it's one of these just odd, crazy people that we run into every day as we're going about our normal business. There's nothing sinister. There's no big conspiracy. It's not some evil mastermind. It's just your local nutter on the corner. And I still believe it is, because the reporting now was that it's just either an immigrant. Well, because it can't be a local. We just got to watch these ones who have come from another place, because they're up to no good. And they probably have some mental health problems, because look, this bloke was locked up and now he's out, and look what's happened. And just on a side note, some people say that this particular bloke and the story written about him, Nikolay Vasiliev, may have been the inspiration for the later accusation of a bloke by the name Dr. Pedachenko, the Russian spy. Other people say that it could be the other way around, that Dr. Pedachenko actually existed and the authorities invented this bloke's, Nikolay Vasiliev, to cover for this other bit of international intrigue. I personally think that both these stories were just made up. Neither of those people existed at all. But this was a suspect that also reinforced in my mind that the media in those days, and you can decide for yourself if you still think that's the case today, but back then, played more of a harmful role in the investigation of Jack the Ripper than a good one, by running with some of these fanciful stories just to sell some papers. So what I'll be doing in the channel is covering a few more of these suspects that haven't been done yet, and I'm leading up to one that has not been mentioned even at all so far in this series, which when we look at the evidence. Well, we're going to put it to the pub test, and you can let me know what you think. I'm really looking forward to that one, but that's a few videos time. But let me know what you think of this one. I personally don't think his story passes the pub test in the fact that, could he have done it? I don't think he was real. That's my opinion. You let me know what you think. If you've got more evidence or more information, throw that down there in comments. And if you are enjoying this, and eventually this channel will have almost all the suspects with at least one video done on them, so you can go back through in 10 years' time and you'll be able to just check out some brief overview information of some of these suspects, and then for some you'll be able to dig in a bit deeper. So there's a lot more content to come, so keep hanging around. So with that in mind, if you are enjoying this, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. And thank you to you people out there who are sharing these videos out there for other people to see. It is bringing a larger audience in, and that is genuinely appreciated. And for all of you watching, I assure you it is genuinely appreciated, you just even viewing this content. But thank you very much again. I'm Owen, you've been watching The Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.